So at this point, I think I'm ready to turn it over to Michael Sawyer to introduce our speaker. Hey, give it up for Michael Sawyer, the one, the only JBS Regional Coordinator.
Stop. Okay, well, as probably everybody in here knows, I'm the coordinator for the John Birch Society for Oklahoma, North Texas, and Western Arkansas. And probably all of you know that we have been exposing and battling the free trade agenda, which isn't about free trade at all. It's about the, should I say, the surrendering of our sovereignty, U.S. sovereignty, to the United Nations through these so-called agreements for a very long time. It's been going on. Karl Marx praised free trade. That's, I guess, probably all I would need to tell you. Anyway, we've been exposing this, and we were at the Reclaiming America for Christ event the last time around last year. And, you know, we had all of our literature on the table. And most Christians, when you start to talk about free trade, their eyes roll up in their head, you know. And they're just not connected. They don't get it. They don't want to get it. They don't want to know about it. And so we're standing there with all of our materials on the table. And we've got, you know, all of our agenda items are out there, all of our DVDs and everything. And this lady comes walking up to me, and she's got this look in her eye like, you know, Eureka, I have found it. And she looks at me and she says, I can't believe that there's actually somebody here that understands what's going on with this free trade agenda. And I looked at her, and so we started to talk. And instantly realized we had a kindred spirit here, that we both, you know, that she understood this as well or better as anybody else standing at that table did. And so we got together and talked for quite a while, and then I made an appointment with her, and quick like a bunny, I recruited her as fast as I could before she could change her mind. And so she is now a member of the John Birch Society. And so over time, you know, we've talked, and she's talked to Bob Donahue, who's the section leader in her section there, and so she has a burden for the Strong Cities Network. Okay, and that's you know, as you probably all know, the whole Agenda 21 debacle and everything else, I mean, it all ties in, and they pull it in on the local level, and what they do, again, it's an internationalist program, it's a globalist program. And so she has been studying on this stuff for a very long time. She's very, very knowledgeable on it. And so she's here to speak to us about it. And her name is Catherine Connelly. And if you would come up here, Catherine, and talk to us, we'd really appreciate it. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that introduction. I want to really give a special thanks to Michael and John and Mr. Donahue for inviting me to come here and speak today. I'm really humbled by that and honored by that. I do have a lot of material today, so I'm going to have to talk very fast. If you can't understand me, please just tell me to slow down a little bit. So I'll get started. I usually like to start with a scripture. So here I felt like God was just leading me to Ecclesiastes, and this is something that just popped out of the book. Is there is no remembrance of people of old, and even those who are yet to come or will not be remembered by those who follow them. And to me, that means it's just a reminder of why we need to subscribe to timeless principles, such as timeless principles that we find from our Bible, timeless principles of liberty that our founding fathers identified after reading thousands of books. And we need to take those principles and eliminate identity politics and look at principles. And pass those principles on down to our children and our grandchildren, because long after we're gone, we want them to hold the fort down. So we want liberty to continue. I want to talk a little bit. I'll just give you a little introduction about me, who I am, why I care about outside influences on our cities. My name is Connelly. I've been I guess a closet activist for many, many years. And I closely watch the news. Information that I gather is, I don't have access to the LexisNexis information system, but I do the best I can sorting through what's true and what isn't. In this particular case, I've taken a lot of the material directly from the websites for the Strong Cities Network, which is the topic of today. That is also tied into the United Nations and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. So one of the reasons I recently became especially interested in what is happening in our local communities, particularly in our cities and our city councils, is because some acquaintance of mine posted a video of something that was happened maybe last summer or so. In our Oklahoma City Council, we had a couple of councilmen who were at odds with one another on a particular issue about the budget issues, and they were trying to close one of the schools, some of the schools in Oklahoma City. And the Ward 2 councilman was trying to shame the Ward 7 councilman into silencing his free speech because he said he was getting loud. Excuse me, but I don't remember the First Amendment saying anywhere that that you have free speech except if you get loud. So I thought that was a little bit of a red flag that seemed ridiculous to me. But that was one of the things that recently has drawn me in my attention towards thinking, I'm accustomed to looking at international things going on in the news and national things, but I really need to look closer to home, really look at what's going on in our cities. So I've also seen over the years, just as a citizen, some very strange news articles, not only locally, but across the nation and around the globe. So related to cities in mayoral positions. So if you remember, we have, if you're from Edmond, if you've lived in Edmond for a long time, you may remember there was a mayor, Randall Shadid, and he was here before I even moved to Oklahoma. I'm originally from California, so I can tell you a lot of stories about what that's like, but I'll save that for another time. But I found out in this former mayor of Edmond, one of the first things he did is he moved to remove the cross from the city of Edmond's seal. Okay, so I was a little curious to know why he would feel so vehement about a cross being on the city seal, especially when the Christian heritage is the heritage of our nation. The Judeo-Christian ethic is really the basis of our Constitution. It comes from a lot of the principles of our Constitution, the principles and the 28 principles of liberty that you see on that card that I handed out. A lot of those principles come from directly out of our Bible. Other principles are timeless principles that they discovered through arduous studying over 4,000 books and different types of governments that have existed since Greece. So these people were very well educated. Our founding fathers knew what they were talking about. Their principles, these timeless principles of liberty that they identified, are most of them relate back, to our biblical roots and some to our historical roots that go all the way back to Greece in the classical civilization. So then I saw another article about the former mayor, Randall Shadid, who then filed a lawsuit to either prevent Metro Church from putting up their cross that we see there now on the I-35, or to take it down. So I thought that was a little interesting. He was involved with both of those actions, so that kind of concerned me, that someone involved who was a former city mayor or a practicing city mayor, that he would be involved in those kinds of activities. And then we have other things that the Oklahoma City Council replacing Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day. Okay, I can understand. I mean, I really have a lot of sympathy and empathy, for the indigenous peoples and what they experienced. But to replace, to try to negate a traditional holiday, recognizing someone that we may or may not like, we cannot negate the fact that we understand that what he did was very risky at the time. For someone to claim back in medieval Europe that the world was not flat normally would get you killed, okay, and tortured before that. So we can't negate, all of our history. I'm a little concerned about that. So, and then just something that was not local. In California, there's a little city called Huntington Park that's in Los Angeles County. And they have on their, one of their city commissioner positions has a couple of illegal immigrants on it. And I know at least one of the positions purportedly is those commissioner positions, they pay them over $100K a year, paid by your local taxpayer. So these are the reasons why I became interested and paying closer attention to what's going on in our cities. Here, I just wanted to put this up here real quick. It's a book. It explains really the real history between the meaning of the separation of church and state in America. So when we go back and talk about, have these issues locally where they want to remove the Ten Commandments, where they want to remove the cross from your city emblem, whatever. We might want to go back and read the real true intention of our founding fathers when they were discussing such an issue so that we understand what the original intent was and not what it has become. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what is the Strong Cities Network. This is directly from the Strong Cities Network website. So it was launched at the United Nations or outside the United Nations in September 2015, so it's not that old. The Strong Cities Network is the first ever global network of mayors, municipal level policymakers, and practitioners united to counter violent extremism in all its forms. Oh, I just want to point out here too, it said it's the first ever global network of mayors. That is not entirely true. The United Nations or the European Union created a United Mayors organization across the globe, I think long before that, if I'm remembering correctly, maybe 2003 or so. I could be wrong about that, but about the date, but I know that it's been around a lot longer than just 2015. So anyway, the SCN is led by the ISD, which is the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. It's a consulting agency out of London, England. It is comprised of more than 100 cities. The SCN builds collaboration between mayors, political actors, and frontline teams to tackle polarization, hate, and violence in local communities in every major global region. It operates with a set of fundamental principles agreed by all members that protect and promote human rights and civil liberties in all aspects of its work to prevent violent extremism. Who is it funded by? The good old American taxpayer. It's funded by the U.S. Department of State. Do members of the Strong Cities Network sign up to any governing principles? I thought that was an important question, since they're teaching, they have some teaching materials on this subject. So here's a list of 7 of them. Basically, protection of human rights and efforts to address violent extremism in all its forms and manifestations. Recognition that violent extremism is prevention efforts, and its prevention efforts should not be associated with any particular religion, nationality, civilization, or ethnic group. I understand when they built these training materials that we're going to see, or parts of them, that they were trying to build something that could be distributed through the United Nations to any country, like they could distribute these materials to people in Jordan or distribute these materials to people in Iraq. Well, I don't know that we actually partner there with them through the Strong Cities Network, but their idea is that they can distribute these materials to people of any religion. Now, you and I as Christians know that things don't always work out well if you just don't have Christ involved. So, so I don't know. I'm kind of questioning that a little bit. Anyway, we have more of these principles that they follow. Commitment to stand against any manifestation of religious-based or other related kinds of discrimination. And these are good things. Commitment to policies and programs that address guilt by association, backlash, bigotry, or hate crimes that may occur with incidents of violent extremism. Partnership with local communities. And remember this is important when we start talking about these programs. They're partnering with local communities, including youth, women, and religious leaders on an inclusive, collaborative, non-discriminatory, and rights-respecting basis. Monitoring and evaluation of activities and initiatives aimed at building social cohesion and resilience against violent extremism. And sharing non-sensitive information across the Strong Cities Network. Commitment to complete transparency of funding sources for the Strong Cities Network operation and activities. And these principles were defined and agreed upon at the inaugural meeting of the Strong Cities Network International Steering Committee. The Strong Cities Network governing principles, as with the entire terms of reference, are consistently reviewed at all meetings of the International Steering Committee. Okay, so that was a mouthful for me. It's a lot to say. Okay, the Strong Cities Network and other UN-distributed initiatives are initiated through mayoral offices, through the cities, specifically to bypass legislative oversight because the legislatures are considered too inefficient to meet UN initiatives. How did I find that out? I found that out because there is a Swiss-based company that does studies. They do case studies on different cities and different initiatives that they try to implement locally first or in small towns in Europe first to see if they work. And a lot of those studies the UN uses to create these initiatives. They use the information from that, and that's where this came from. So they're initiated. These SEN programs are initiated through the mayor's office. They partner with your city police. They partner with your city government agencies. They partner with your classrooms or teachers. They partner with your community and faith-based groups in your city. All partnerships are on a volunteer basis. How is the Strong Cities Network implemented? I thought, well, this sounds great. All of these things sound wonderful. I mean, who wouldn't want to stop violent extremism in your community? Of course you want to stop that. I mean, nobody wants that. So my next question was, well, really, how is this being implemented? And, what exactly are they teaching? So as part of the membership, and this, again, is directly from the Strong Cities Network website. As part of your membership, Strong Cities are given access to a series of training modules on CVE, countering violent extremism tools that can be used at the municipal level. Training modules are made up of a series of lessons containing presentations, video content, and multiple choice questions. Lessons are intended to provide practical steps for cities on how to use these tools effectively in their communities. Modules inform and test students' knowledge while also providing information and support for policymakers and practitioners operating at the local level. Module participants are also encouraged to use the comment section to provide feedback on lessons. The feedback will be incorporated into future modules to improve SCN training, which I would highly recommend we do if we actually are partnering with the SCN network here, because I have a couple of little reservations about some of the things that they're teaching. Most of it looks really good and looks like it's really well intended and really well thought through. But again, we have people from London, England, developing these programs, using information and studies out of Switzerland, and they do not have the American experience. The people developing these initiatives are very well educated millennials, but they do not have the American experience. They do not understand the patriotic spirit that we have here. They don't understand those things, so they're very well intended. And a lot of it is, I think they're really trying to do the right thing, but there are a couple things that I think we need to speak up about to have them tweak some of their materials, especially if it's going to be, if anyone here in Oklahoma City decides to partner with them. So here's a screen capture from their Strong Cities webpage on their education. You'll see there's 3 legs. There's actually 3 separate websites to this. Extreme Dialogue, Digital Resilience, and Internet Citizens. Each one of those are separate websites and that spin off from the Strong Cities website. The Extreme Dialogue is really interesting. It has maybe about 5 videos on there of former extremists telling their stories, why it was, how they were lured into becoming an ISIS fighter, for instance, and what their experience was in Iraq as an ISIS fighter and coming back out of that, and how did they get out of it, and why this is so bad and destructive. And so there are like 5 videos like that. There's one of a former IRA member, a former white extremist, from the U.S. There are like 3 others. I can't remember what they all are, but they're examples to try to show, I guess, teenagers or, whoever the teachers, if they decide to partner with them, it's to show children why this is a bad idea to get involved in extremism. The digital resilience, that leg of it, is about teaching children how to not fall into trusting these extremists who are trying to lure them into, for instance, becoming an ISIS fighter. How do you recognize the signs? Okay, and then the 3rd leg is the Internet Citizens. It's a website for young people to go to. I think it's primarily now used in the UK, according to their literature, not necessarily, I don't know if it's being used here or not, but the description says it's being used in the UK. So what Internet Citizens is about is to build young people's resilience to hate and extremism online, and is currently running in 30 youth centers across the UK. So they have a section on their website. It's called Myth Busting, about the Strong Cities Network. And that was one of the handouts that I gave that's actually from the Strong Cities Network. Has a lot of questions and answers. So I'm not going to go through every single one of those right now, but I made a handout so you can read it yourself. So I noticed a couple things. So now we're to the part where I want to point out a few little red flags associated with Strong Cities Network. Again, I am not saying that this is that everything in it is entirely bad. It's not. It's really well intended, very well thought out. But again, it's being developed by people who do not have the American experience. So overall, it's well intended. However, we may want to consider further, the UN initiatives are being voluntarily injected into our communities through partnerships, bypassing traditional legislative oversight. More specifically, some of the training material may need to be tweaked because some of the principles being taught from ISDs, particularly this fringe insurgency.pdf, may not align with constitutional principles. Additionally, it criticizes and even maligns those on the political right, going so far as to name specific individuals. Those who express principles of liberty through opinionated social media. So, from this fringe insurgency PDF, which you can Google up and find it yourself and read it yourself if you're interested, one of the key findings in the report that popped up, right at the top, is that extreme right groups across the globe are actively collaborating to achieve common goals, such as keeping refugees out of Europe, removing hate speech laws, and getting far-right populist politicians to power.
This is being funded by our State Department.
Yes.
Nice of it.
So, of course, that's a very subjective statement. You know, I would think that most of you here are wondering, you know, how exactly are they defining far-right extremism versus, you know, standard right, you know, folks and who are not violent. Here's a list of the actual key findings from the executive summary of the Fringe Insurgency PDF distributed by the ISD talking about extreme right groups. The first one I've already read. I highlighted removing hate speech laws because I'm going to touch on that a little bit here in a minute. Campaigns around, so they go on, they're talking about some campaigns, I guess, in Europe that were going on that they considered far right, and then they mentioned Charlottesville. The Charlottesville rally received financial and operational support from numerous European and North American countries. Alternative online platforms, some created explicitly for use by the extreme right, provide mechanisms for transnational knowledge exchange, fundraising, and coordinated information operations. Their strategic, tactical, and operational convergence has allowed the extreme right to translate large-scale online mobilization in real-world impact. Through coordinated grassroots activities, they have been able to influence elections. Can you imagine that? Attract worldwide media attention and intimidate political opponents. Then high levels of opportunism, blah, blah, blah. I think the last line is the one I was really interested in. Extreme right groups actively seek to overcome ideological and geographic divergences for the sake of expanding their influence. Reach and impact. Their communication materials are tailored to different audiences and highlight topics ranging from white nationalist activism to freedom of speech protection. Can you imagine wanting to protect freedom of speech? That is shocking. So here we go. Here's a picture of their website. And the ISD, over on the lower right-hand corner, you'll see the Fringe Insurgency. If you go to the website and click on that, you will find that PDF that I just quoted from. So you can read it yourself. Here's a little screen capture from part of the PDF where they are pointing out, they're trying to tie in here extreme right violent groups with Alex Jones. Okay. And they even specifically name Paul Joseph Watson, was a very popular commentator who tends to really rip apart, you know, anyone on the liberal side of the aisle with facts. Can you imagine that? So and you'll notice in these two red boxes here, they're kind of saying that they really don't, they're shocked that anyone would want to vote for somebody on the right side of the aisle. So, and they give some stats there. So what I'm trying to show you here is it's very obvious that whoever wrote this was very biased against the right side of the aisle. And they're teaching this to children in schools who partner with the ISD here. So, people, I hope nobody here is going to get offended or is really too wishy-washy, because I'm going to talk about something a little bit difficult, okay? It may be a little painful. There is no mention of what prompted supposed right-wing groups. Now, albeit there are some groups that are very right-wing and violent, and we don't want those people. We don't want anybody who's violent in our societies, okay, in our communities. We don't want people like that. But there are some groups who are kind of on the right that have developed because they're living, they feel like they're living under tyranny or in fear. And it's a real problem, especially in the UK. It's been a problem. And in some of these materials, from the ISD, talking about right-wing extremists. They pointed out in Britain, they were talking about the EDL, the English Defence League, which initially did not start out violent, but was later infiltrated by people who were, so it ruined it. And then there was the Britain First. If you're familiar with a group called Britain First, that came into being. They're just local citizens who became, they were very afraid and incensed because many of their children, their daughters, between maybe 10 and 16, were being sexually exploited by resettled populations from Pakistan. Primarily, not all of them were. Some were British citizens, but the problem was so grave that some of these groups like Britain First evolved out of these kinds of really horrible problems. And the parents would complain. They'd go to the police station and they would complain. They'd say, hey, you know, my child is being human trafficked and gang raped by these people every week. They come in, she's on her way to school and they get her. She's on the way home from school, they get her. You know, they take her to some flat somewhere and there's 8 or 10 men waiting there. One little girl reported having gasoline poured on her, and they told her they were going to set her on fire if she didn't do what they wanted her to do. And so this is a real problem. This is from the BBC News. But the ISD, talk about violent extremism, doesn't mention this. There's nothing in there about this. And in the city of Rotherham, it just so happens, and this is happening all over the UK, but it just so happens that in the city of Rotherham, there was a social worker there who started documenting what was happening to these girls. She documented over 1,400 cases, and I've recently seen they've now got over 1,500 of these cases documented. This has been going on for over 15 years, and nothing was ever done about it. The parents would go to the police, okay, and they'd say, hey, you got to do something about this. You got to stop this. This is insane. Our child can't even go to school, okay? And the police didn't do anything about it. They were terrified. They were petrified. You know why? They were afraid they would be politically incorrect. They were afraid of being called racist if they arrested the people who were doing this to their children. That's why they did nothing. Here are some of the people who were arrested eventually. People who had been resettled from third and fourth world countries. Not all of them are, but a lot of them are. Furthermore, in these materials, there's no mention of violent left-wing groups, okay, like Antifa, or paid Democratic supporters who interrupted Trump rallies, or conservative guest speakers at Berkeley last year. There are no reports or studies on how Antifa or other violent leftist groups should be recognized and countered, nor were there any examples of Antifa or violent left-wingers in their former extremist video series. So here's a little picture here just to show, if you're familiar with what happened at Berkeley last year, there were some political conservative speakers that went to speak there. Milo Yiannopoulos and also Ann Coulter tried to speak there, but their speeches were shut down. The University Republican Club wanted them to speak, but their speeches were shut down because of all the extreme violence that was going on that Antifa was creating. They even set the place on fire, so they had to shut it down, so they never did. So that's kind of a problem when you're suppressing free speech because of violence and left-wing violence that's never mentioned in these materials. So one other thing I think we have to approach very carefully is this idea of hate speech. It may require additional analysis and investigation, particularly due to the fact that free speech is our First Amendment constitutional right. Okay, so what are we teaching about that? What does the Institute for Strategic Dialogue teach about hate speech in American schools who have chosen to partner with Strong Cities Network? The answer is, what is being taught about hate speech in American schools is not clear, since the level of detail may only be obtained by actually signing into the SCN website, which requires our mayor's approval. Since when do American citizens need our mayor's approval to log into a website? So here's a screen capture from the Strong Cities Network, right there, and I put in red. You can see in order to sign your city up to the Strong Cities Network, you will need the approval of your mayor. Please complete the below application form, and the Strong Cities team will be in contact to start the official registration process. So, however, we may get some ideas on how hate speech is being defined by London's ISD, which may likely be sharing principles with the European Union Council. Just as a side note, which is not actually an elected, freely elected body. Like if you're a citizen of England, you don't elect anybody on that council, okay? Never have an opportunity to, so because you don't elect them, you can't hold them accountable either. So anyway, most of these European Council members are also people who have worked for the IMF, or the International Monetary Fund. Here I found this website. It talks about European hate speech laws and the history of it. They originally were created for a good reason. It was to prevent what happened in Nazi Germany to the Jewish people, to prevent that from ever happening again. However, it is getting to a point where it may be misused. Okay, some people are misinterpreting, what the original intent of this was for. Some people are saying, see here it says, since the end of World War II, many European countries have witnessed a proliferation of hate speech legislation designed to curb incitement to racial and religious hatred. Though originally intended to guard against the kind of xenophobic and anti-Semitic propaganda that gave rise to the Holocaust today, national hate speech laws have increasingly been invoked to criminalize speech that is merely deemed insulting to one's race, ethnicity, religion, or nationality. So, in this particular website, I have the link up there at the top, under the guise of tolerance and coexistence, Islamists have often manipulated such laws in a bid to monopolize debate and define what is beyond the pale of permissible public discussion. So here's some more information about from Toby Mendel, from the Executive Director of Center of Law and Democracy, about how hate speech is being defined in the European Union sense. But here are some interesting articles I came across. Now here's a case where we have a street evangelist in the UK, and he's out there doing his thing, and somebody comes up to him and asks him a question, a very valid question. He was asked if being gay was a sin. And so rather than trying to explain it himself, he thought, well, I'm just going to open the Bible and start reading from the Bible and see what God says about it, right? And so he did. And so the street evangelist started reading directly from the Bible about what the Bible says about this topic. And the person who asked the question did not like what the Bible said. So he called the police. The police were called. And the police in the UK came and arrested the street evangelist for hate speech. He was hauled off to jail. Next 6 months, fast forward, he had to pay all these legal fees and deal with all this harassment, for quoting from the Bible. He finally gets his day in court, and of course the judge looks at the case and says, you're exonerated, get out of here. There is no law against quoting from the Bible in the UK. But for some reason, some unknown reason, the police seem to think that there is. So I'm questioning what made them think that there is? Is it something like associated with a Strong Cities network, that's partners with cities, police stations? I don't know. I haven't gotten that far in my research to verify if, anything like that's going on, but it just makes you wonder, why are we seeing things like this in the news? Why are people being harassed for quoting from the Bible? So my point is we have to be a little bit careful about how we're defining hate speech and what's being taught. I understand the original intent was very good originally, but we're also seeing it here in the U.S. Starting up, Minneapolis hate crime hotline becomes a lightning rod. So they're trying to set up this concept, this principle of hate speech being something that you need to be monitored for or you can be reported for here in the United States. So we can go on, you can look at Wikipedia's definition of hate speech, patterns of the, and then I want to talk about patterns of the UN web found right here in Oklahoma City. There's a huge web. I could fill out this chart even more. It actually all goes back to the IMF and all of this stuff that, all these initiatives that are distributed through the UN are actually parts of a web that fall under sustainable development, which is a concept out of the International Monetary Fund to kind of make sure that they get their ROI, the return on investment on their loans. Whoops, I don't think it's going. All right, yeah, I'm almost to the end, so, okay, let's see if we can get it going here. Thank you. Okay, so, right here in Oklahoma City, I just saw this article, maybe a week or two ago. Oklahoma City is in the top spot for 2018 Bloomberg Award. If you do a Google search on this, you'll find out there's many other cities who are also in the top spot for the 2018 Bloomberg Award. And I did a little research on Bloomberg. Bloomberg, he was actually appointed as special envoy for cities and climate change by the United Nations. So, and I'm guessing that he's also the publicity and advertising arm of the UN initiatives throughout the U.S. and possibly even Europe. So, here we go. Here's the article. You can find this out on the internet. It says, our team is looking at how shared data, linked resources, and use of community health workers can create a safer community and a sustainable and healthy lifestyle for those being redirected from criminal justice. We are excited to continue working on solving one of the toughest issues facing Oklahoma City and communities across the country. And it sounds good. I mean, it sounds really good. It sounds like, yeah, this is fantastic, But again, as Christians and activists in our community, let's just keep an eye on these programs, and if we can get involved in them, it's even better. We can get involved in them because if we get involved in them, we can inject our influence as Christians and say, hey, is that biblical? Is that constitutional? We can start asking questions, and because some of this stuff is really, it's really well intended, but again, we have to ask questions. Are they really? Are we really teaching what's constitutional and what's biblical? Are we teaching our natural rights to the next generation? So also, I don't think this is related to the Strong Cities Network, but it looks very familiar, like one of the UN initiatives that could be partially partnering with this in the city. There are threads of social justice principles from the UN's definitions in our cities, but more investigation will need to be done to determine how these principles are being defined or implemented. Local activists should participate in these events. Please keep in mind that these partnerships are well intended. So I would encourage you to go to some of these. events, and there are actually a lot of really good things about these because it's helping to bring unity across our city among the different racial groups that exist. So there's a lot of really good things about it, and they're Christian-based. But again, let's make sure that that we're teaching biblical and constitutional principles. Here is a table of contents directly from the UN Social Justice PDF. You can see right there it talks about social justice being the equivalent of distributive justice. Some people translate that to wealth distribution. So, what does that mean? So, and I give you a list. There's a handout here on what Christian activists in Oklahoma City can do. A list of suggestions down at the bottom in one of these handouts. The Strong Cities Networks, just things that you can do as a person. And that's it. And that's all I've got today. Thank you very much. I appreciate you all.